This has been a time of anniversaries. It's the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Crime of Genocide. It's also 70 years since nearly 3 million people lost their lives in a Korean War. And 10 years ago, in another anniversary, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, which was chaired by His Honour Justice Michael Kirby, found incontrovertible evidence of crimes against humanity in North Korea and said the country's leadership and perpetrators should be persecuted by the International Criminal Court. Just for the record, this is what they found, that the state had committed crimes against humanity, including, I quote, extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence, persecution on political, religious, racial, and gender grounds, the forcible transfer of populations, the enforced disappearance of persons, and the inhumane act of knowingly causing prolonged starvation. He went on to say that there was widespread, systematic, and gross, unspeakable atrocities on a vast scale, amounting to crimes against humanity. And Justice Kirby and his commission said they were, I quote, strikingly similar to crimes committed by Nazi Germany. The Commission of Inquiry said that those gross violations are continuing, ongoing, because of their policies, institutions, and patterns of impunity that lie at their heart. They remain, he said, in place. And I was struck by the truth of the contemporary nature of that 10 years later by just two stories recently. One was from a rare group of people who were able to escape from North Korea in a boat. And one of the men in that boat described how he had been forced to watch the execution of a 22-year-old because that young man had been found listening to K-pop. And then there was a story that the BBC recorded and brought to light a couple of weeks ago about two other young people who'd watched some K-drama, and they had been sent as a result of that to hard labor. So all the things that were described 10 years ago continue to be in place. But things have moved on in some respects. The threat of Chinese and or a Russian veto in the United Nations Security Council has been consolidated further. And it means that those recommendations that Mr. Kirby and his commission made have never been implemented, and that in these 10 years, the resistance of this axis of authoritarian dictatorships has only deepened and got worse. In a nutshell, in the intervening decade, the human rights crisis and security challenges have worsened under Kim Jong-un. Let's be in no doubt about that. They've been exacerbated by Putin's war in Ukraine, security and weapons links between the Kremlin and the Pyongyang. They've been exemplified by the spectre of Putin and Kim plotting and planning more bloodshed in Ukraine. And we've seen, as I say, the rise of other authoritarian states who have many links with one another. Secondly, COVID-19 exacerbated the isolation of the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea, with the complete sealing of the border, making it almost impossible for anyone to escape and much more difficult to get information in. But it goes on being a challenge that we must face to break the information blockade and to guarantee the right in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that every human being, wherever they live, has the right to access information freely. And thirdly, China is now openly flouting the Refugee Convention of 1951 by repatriating North Korean refugees. And while the CCP threats to Taiwan and the South China Sea have further increased China's hostility to accountability and the international law, that doesn't make it any easier to bring to justice those responsible for the depredations in North Korea. Fourthly, President Trump may have been right in terms of applying pressure to get dialogue on security issues, but the big failing was that he excluded human rights from the agenda equation. And with elections, more elections in the Republic of Korea this year, more elections in the United Kingdom and in the United States, I hope that we will have bipartisan and bilateral agreements that we will stand together in raising the human rights dialogue simultaneously with the security threats. And fifthly, although it's vital that the international community revisits the COI report and dusts off its shelf and reviews its recommendations, democratic nations are still failing to take security and human rights in tandem seriously. So I was pleased that the security agenda item on human rights in North Korea was a welcome beginning. But now that we see the Republic of Korea sitting on the Security Council for the next 2 years, there is that one glimmer of hope. There remains a prospect that the international community will force Russia, force China to put up or shut up. The democratic nations that believe in the rule of law have their duty not to let dust gather on the COI recommendations, and make sure that this 10th anniversary is a time when we truly do assert every one of those 30 articles in the Declaration of Human Rights, which is universal and which applies to every human being, and yet every single one of those 30 articles in the Universal Declaration are violated in North Korea. We must ensure that we raise our voices on behalf of those who are unable to speak for themselves.